Good afternoon, everyone. It's with great pleasure that I welcome you all to another one of our noontime lecture series. Having established a productive relationship with the Swiss consulate over the past few years, today's event extends that dialogue towards new dimensions. It's also a reminder that the transition of administrations and key people who have built institutional dialogue, something I hope we can enjoy for years to come, even after I step down. To this end, I want to begin by thanking Pult Aita, the head of the Department of Culture, and Vera Penjavik, senior project manager, both of the Swiss consulate, who've been eager advocates of Swiss culture, and equally so probing in their questions and challenges to the kind of debates we bring into our halls. There's possibly something anachronistic about national representation in a world that is increasingly international and cross-cultural in nature. And yet Vera and Aita both remind me of the diversity that is embedded within the Swiss borders. And as much as outsiders, we tend to create monoliths out of cultural profiles, there's much nuance to be drawn out of the voices of the many protagonists within Switzerland today. Our speakers today, Oliver Lütjens and Thomas Padmanabhan, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name always, do not fit a typical profile. Despite their tutelage under Diener and Diener, or maybe precisely because of it, they've set out to define a form of practice that is diametrically opposed to the very education they may have received. And this may not be the result of irreverence, but an index of the changing circumstances to which they need to respond, as much as it is an indication of their own broader interests. As architects, they love history. They love the city. They love the building types that give rise to particular cultures. And they love the urban conditions that produce streets, plazas, and urbanities at large. And yet, the very circumstances of the city today defies the possibility of working within traditional parameters. How they negotiate the traditional values that are part of their education and the new ethics they bring to build looking forward is part of their plight today. If the cultural condition of the city did not impose this contradiction on them, then the mere economies of today's budgets also disallows them the opulence of the very historic precedents they so revere. Out of this dialogue emerges a body of work that is built out of self-imposed restrictions, a set of constraints so rigorous that it requires close scrutiny to discern how architecture emerges not so much out of elaboration, but rather its opposite, the single mark, the slight deviation in plan, the misalignment of a column, the shift in scale of a figural attribute, and the list goes on. I do not know Oliver and Thomas beyond one conversation, but the generosity of their outlook in even that brief dialogue opened my eyes to their probing minds. In their practice, if their practice is in Switzerland, somehow their preoccupations lie in America itself. Lamenting the loss of the kind of transatlantic discursive interaction that was once so conventional, their intellectual profile is as much dedicated to an America that we do not even look at ourselves with such close scrutiny. More specifically, two key protagonists stand out in their mental journeys. And even within our brief chat, I witnessed a defense of Robert Venturi's building so militant that it prompted a request on my part, not only to present their own work, but also represent that of Venturi's, whether as cultural backdrop or with a new lens to which we may not have access. I'm actually not sure if the structure of their presentation will deliver on this, but the context remains an important one for their own work. The other protagonist is, of course, John Haydock himself, whose figural attributions make their way into this work, but from a very different vantage point. Now looking back to Haydock 20 years after his passing, allowing enough historical distance to revisit the work with a critical eye, this is also an important moment to see how that may gain new relevance when seen from an outside's perspective. So in great part, I'm also interested in a discussion not so much of Switzerland, but of America itself. How are we seen? How are we interpreted? How are we refashioned? What can be seen from the outside that we cannot see from within? With that, I welcome Oliver and Thomas to Cooper Union with the sincere hopes that this invitation may be transformed into an in-person visit before long. For now, as we remain online in some aspects, I'm also inviting Daisy Ames, who is right here next to me, to join me in a conversation after the presentation to help extend the conversation, as it were, not only for today's event, but for the housing studio that Oliver and Thomas have graciously accepted to be a part of next semester. And with that, help me welcome Thomas and Oliver to the mic.
Nader, thank you very much for your generous introduction. We feel very flattered, and I'm not sure we can deliver on the long list of what you've said about us. The title of our lecture is quite simple. It's Houses and Housing. And the reason why we have chosen this title is not only because as young architects and now middle-aged architects, we mostly got commissions for housing in Switzerland, but also because during our practice, we felt that housing was maybe the most productive field for an architect to think about, to speculate on, and to bring about social, environmental, and societal change to the world and to architecture. So we have, in our lecture, we have chosen 3 projects, one realized, one which is on site, and the other one, the third one that is going to go on site at the beginning of next year, to talk about the friction that we encounter between a reality and ideal, and the possibilities to carve out a space for the change of society and for a more responsive relationship to the environment. Let's start with the Realize project, which is on Waldmeisterweg in Zurich.
Hello, everyone. I'll start with this project. This is an apartment building that we've built three years ago in a kind of suburb of Zurich. It's, as you can see in this plan, it's an open urban structure, mostly apartment buildings, mostly rental apartment buildings and cooperatives. In Zurich, quite unlike the US, I guess, there's a strong emphasis on the rental market, and there's almost no buyer's market. The client for this project is a foundation that is providing low cost housing. Yet they are very engaged in kind of good quality architecture, also from a standpoint that when you build in a good way, the houses will last longer. It's a more sustainable way of constructing, less reparation, less destruction. So I'm not sure, our building is, I don't have a pointer, so I will just continue. Our building is looking at quite some building mass in an area where you can see there's single family houses, semi-detached houses, and 2 to 3 floor rental apartment buildings. On the southern end, there's a big cooperative building, was building 7-floor height buildings, and we realized the pressure of the building laws that allows for a high density, that this pressure could destroy the kind of leafy quality of this kind of garden village or garden city. You can see our building has quite a peculiar shape, which is not a form that is coming from inside the building, but rather from the outside. we were discussing very simple ideas. We said, okay, the longest facade should be on this little neighborhood road called Waldmeisterweg. Then you see that the shape of the building works like a fence, demarcating a territory, but being formed or shaped by outside events. On the southeastern side, there's a loose configuration with a large group of trees in the center. And on the southwestern side, where there's this other kink, the building opens up towards the evening sun and towards its own garden space. So therefore, this is not a form that comes from within, but from outside. And if the circumstances of the outside would be different, then also the form could be different.
The relationship between that outside form and the internal structure of the building, which is quite rectangular for the most part, there are only a few tilted walls, is creating the main tension as we see it in that we discovered in the project. And there are 2 staircases, and the rest of the building is almost rectangular in structure, the apartment structure. Next, please. It is, and that's, I have to admit, it's an afterthought. But after the project, we discovered this fantastic work by the American artist Solowit, who went to Amsterdam, and while he was staying there, he did this work where he connected different places on the map of Amsterdam that he had demarcated and linked them, and the result was a shape that he cut out and he took away from the existing map. The result is an amazing tension between these, the structural order of the city and this cutout. Next, please.
Yeah. All right. You know, we are very Swiss architects, but as Nader said, we kind of left some things behind. So the Swiss architecture is so well known for an incredible material culture that is also based on still a very active and good high quality craftsmanship. But in today's buildings in Switzerland, where insulation, thickness of insulation is continuously growing, the kind of heavy in situ poured concrete facades seem to us to belong to an area that we cannot connect to, neither on an architectural level, but also not on an economical level. But Thomas and me, we almost never start with material, but rather think of proportion, order, rhythm, elements of architectural language in order to define, say, the facade or the expression of a building. And here, that's
sometimes that's considered quite immoral in Switzerland, because and there we feel lightheartedly American, because of course in the US you can have a building with columns.
Okay, so over here we build the halls.
Sorry, you can have a building with historical elements that is built in plaster and brick, but you can also have the same building in vinyl if it should be cheaper. So the relationship, or in wood, and painted wood. So the relationship in American culture, the relationship between form and construction is traditionally a bit more loose, and there are more possibilities. Something that the Swiss would frown upon, I think. Sorry, Ollie. Go on.
So this is a 1:50 model that we build all our projects in 1:50 because it's the only scale where detail and the totality can be seen in one glance. But anyhow, the problem of the facade on this building was first the scale. The building is 5 floors high. Second, the site was sloping. It was sloping a full floor, full story to the garden side, and we were wondering, like, so on what does this thing stand on? You know, what is the tectonic order of this facade? So we drew this line in the center that divides the facade in two equal parts. And we realized that this line keeps the facade in a kind of hovering to the ground. And it's not unlike this work by Jeff Koons, where the tank is a 50-50 tank, right? So half of it is water, half of it is air. This creates a line in the center where the three basketballs are in absolute perfect levitation. And in a similar way, this middle line, this belt running around the facade, is kind of structuring or holding, is holding our facade in place. Thomas.
Yeah, and when we were working on that competition, we were looking a lot at Brunelleschi's work, and the great Renaissance Italian master. He had this way of combining the pietra serena, which is a dark gray stone, and a light gray plaster into his fantastic buildings. And you see the Foundlings House in Florence on the left. And what we discovered while we were working on our project, in this project, was that he did something that was unusual. The relationship between the pietra serena, the dark parts, and the smooth plaster surface is not one of a wall with applied elements, but it's also not the opposite. It's not a structure, a framework of elements that are filled in with plaster, but it's something in between. And that relationship between structure and surface that was ambiguous really fascinated us. But of course, you do low-cost housing in a suburb of Switzerland, so Brunelleschi, well, I'm not sure whether that will lead you very far in the process. So we had this strange point in the development of our project where we felt how does that transform? And then what happened is a friend of us, he came to pick us up for lunch before midday, and he looked at one of the working models of our project, and he said, you know, this is really a Venturi beach house you're doing. And we realized that is the key to transforming that idea of order into something, into a materiality and a way of life that can connect to our modern reality, and also to a kind of lightness and friendly atmosphere of a kind of lower middle class neighborhood in Switzerland. So the idea that if we would do a Brunelleschi with the voice of a Venturian beach house, then it would turn from being a kind of highbrow citation into something extremely friendly and approachable. So, and of course, we have chosen this image to the right of the Lieb Beach House by Venturi, because it's not just about the architecture, but it's because of the life, that informal, friendly life that this kind of architecture makes possible.
And this transformed the facade from a mural facade into something constructed, Eternit, plates, thinness, wooden elements, air in between gaps, a construction that is light and not heavy, thin and not massive. Yet, as you can see in Venturi's example, it's full of tension, and it carries quite a bit of pop and a kind of consumer vernacular with it. And also that we thought is a great, because, you know, nowadays we live with big color TVs, ugly plastic furniture, all this kind of stuff. And yeah, we wanted to make a building that is inclusive and not exclusive. A building where everybody could be, like at the beach, live the way he wants, and everybody at the beach, the good thing, economically speaking, everybody at the beach is equal. There's not really status symbols. Okay, but let's continue.
One last comment about just go back one second, Ollie, please. The relationship between language, between the elements of language, of architectural language, and the tone of your voice is really key. We find that and one of the things that we learned from Ventura is that once you say something with a new voice, with a fresh voice, you can say sentences and things that have been said before, and suddenly they transform. So it's not a detached kind of postmodern approach to language that we have, where language is always language. Words are words that are outside of yourself. We actually mean what we do, but we feel that the idea of transforming something when you find the right voice allows us to say quite complex things with a light tone in our voice.
Well, in Switzerland, however, you don't win a competition. And this was a competition where actually we won this competition as a youngster architects team. You don't win a competition in Switzerland with the facade. You win the competition with the plan. And the invention of our plan was that we said the client asked for the living room being detached from the eating and dining hall. There's a lot of contemporary apartments here where these rooms are connected. One big fluent space where you cook, you eat, and where you also live. But this client says, we want to look at a high occupancy, and we want to look at flexibility. We want the living room to be a separate room in order to also have students living in these apartments, or that it's flexible for family life if there's more people living in this.
Yeah, and basically the only way you can build cheaply in Switzerland is not by building cheaply, because you cannot build cheaply in Switzerland. The only way of offering low-cost apartments to families or people with lower incomes is to be smarter with the surface, to reduce the surface. So this type allowed us to have one bedroom more, even if this bedroom is actually called the living room. So you could actually use the entrance hall, the kitchen hall, we called it the kitchen hall, the central kitchen space, as a living room and as a kitchen, and have a three-bedroom, a three-room flat, which would be in American terms a two-bedroom, but this two-bedroom would actually have three separate rooms that you can use as bedrooms. So basically, you would have more surface and pay less.
On the other hand, the kitchen hall is something that comes from rural typologies in Switzerland. Farmhouses have that. You enter the kitchen first, you deposit your dirty shoes, and from there on you go to the other quarters, especially to the what we call Stube, the living room, which in a farmhouse is usually kind of in wooden cladding. And so also here the floors are changing. But we thought that this farm analogy to farmhouses relates also to the kind of garden city idea of the neighborhood. You can see that typology of the apartments is always the same, with the kitchen hall and the bedrooms going off of that. And there's always a loggia as well in this kind of trifoil figure, kitchen hall, living room, and loggia. But due to the shape of the building, due to the exterior shape of the facade, each apartment has very different spatial configurations. You can see here that we're using two kinds of floors. There's a tiled floor for kitchen hall and bathroom that connects this cellular room to room plan and gives a kind of more fluent area. And then there's wooden floors in the bedrooms and in the living room. The structure is very efficient. You have only load-bearing brick walls, so there's very short spans. But there is this one point where the span is a bit higher, and our structural engineer says, I need a bit of concrete here in order to make the span work. and we said, can we take the concrete out of the wall and make it visible as a column? And since this column isn't so load bearing, we could make it in terrazzo and then with iron inside and sand it down in order to have a strong visual effect. And now this column is not only a structural element, but it also accentuates the center of this trifoil of the three main rooms in the building. And while you can see the column being detached from the wall, there's a shadow attached to the column. And on the other hand, the floor of the kitchen is running into the living room, following the loggia, providing an area where you can bring the plants in winter. And this wooden piece is actually, it's the threshold, right? It's this piece of wood that you have in between doors, but instead of being in the door, it connected to the column and it provides this shadow and kind of maximizing the moment of transition between the two major rooms in the apartments. And we're in late autumn here in Zurich. Weather is still great, but in November it will be so gray for 2 or 3 months. But in this house, in this kind of beach house, the sun is always shining. I'm just going to walk through the house a bit to give you an idea.
This is the bathroom. In the bathroom, we to be economical with ceramic surfaces, we said we would only have them where they're necessary and treat them like towels, beach towels that you hang on the wall. And so to have a space where you have a joyful relationship between the cladding and the unclad surface. The interior of the main staircase is an homage to the architect who has a similar name like Oliver, Sir Edwin Lütjens, the great architect of English country houses and the capital New Delhi. And we found out that if you use these prefab artificial stone concrete steps, we can easily have different colors without much additional cost, and bring a powerful graphic presence into the public areas of the house. The problem was, or the challenge was, that even though this is a socially engaged client, there was no real public program, no common program to the building. So the two things we did was to make the interior of the public areas really joyful with a minimum of cost, and to enlarge the required common washing space. Switzerland has a very interesting tradition of apartment buildings with common washing areas. You don't have your washing machine inside your apartment, but you share it. Huh? And we just doubled it in size. We gave it big windows and put it on the main facade. So it started that it doubled as a community space, as a place where now we know that now Santa Claus is coming to this place and meets the children. They have a market, used clothing market there, and they have toys there that they belong to that space and not to the children who use them, but they come and use them and leave them there.
It's 20 apartments, so they have quite a nice community, and a lot of the people moving in were in the end young families with babies, and so there's lots of kids' toys and stuff lying around in the building and on the outside. They're quite unlike in these images. It's the grey November weather. That was just when the building was finished, and Helen Binet came to take these pictures.
So there's not much of beach atmosphere on these pictures. Well, we can assure you that there is a real beach atmosphere when it's getting warmer and we have a sunny weather. Now it's more the kind of reserved Florentine grayish tones of Brunelleschi that comes out.
With a hint of John Haddock in it, Thomas.
Yes.
With our
Yes.
canopy. Nader said that we are huge fans of John Haddock. I think we both. I mean, we of course we love the drawn work. We love these early plans, the modernist, the diamond houses, and all that. But I think what struck us was the project in Berlin, the way they engage with the city, the melancholy they exude, the figural qualities that they have and that got reintroduced into modern architecture. And so for some time now, we've been making homages, or like in this case, just directly copying stuff by Haydock, and we just love this incredible physical presence of these canopies and the kind of scale they give to the building. So here you can see how the Eternit plates are lapping, and the kind of open joints between the vertical wooden pilasters. We love the thinness of this building, the delicacy. It's fragile almost, or vulnerable even, and I guess that comes from this love of vernacular architecture in America, and maybe also we love it so much because we look at it through the eyes of Bob Venturi and Denise Scott Brown, as we showed in the early beach house. I mean, in the
also sometimes we have been looking, of course, at the early Frank Algier buildings, and we have looking at these things, we have a very idealized idea of American architecture that is an architecture where the thinness and the everyday quality of things can turn into an incredible beauty, and you don't need tons of money or heavy materials or precious things to create something incredibly beautiful, and it can be very ephemeral, and sometimes we are saddened by the fact that there are not so many, not enough architects in the US today who are exploring it. Maybe it's hard to do, to kind of take to continue where the everyday American architecture stops, and to take the same stuff and the same material and somehow do something with it. We have friends in the US, and we know it's very hard, but that's a kind of an idealistic longing that we have for the US.
Talking about the corners of the building, we said it's more like a fence, that the shape, it could be like a paravent, where different plates are standing next to each other. And in this work by Richard Serra, we find there's an incredible beauty in these 4 steel plates, how they lean against each other and how they create a very clear and simple shape, a cube. Yet it's an image of negotiation, of balance, of each part doing its thing to maintain this figure. And in a similar way, and it's very hard to see in this image, the Eternit plates, they are not not coming to a real corner, but they're overlapping, they're leaning against each other. It's more like a house of cards, like the title of Sarah's work. And that's also kind of an image for the fragility of a community. It's the attic of the building. It's less architecture. It's more surface. It's not structured. It has plasticity that relates to the Eternit facade, but it's made with exterior insulation and coating of plaster and metal. I think we have to speed up a bit, Thomas.
Yeah, I know. Okay, I'll go real fast. The next project is Zwhatt. It was a competition based for an investor who developed an area outside of Zurich, only about 15 minutes with a suburban train, in a village that houses one of the biggest prisons of Switzerland, and that is now reinventing itself as a new kind of commuter center, and they are transforming a former
Well,
kind
hang
of
on, the prison is not reinventing itself, is it?
no, the prison, not the town, the village
Yeah,
is
the
reinventing
town, yeah.
itself. No, and they have this former commercial industrial site that they are transforming in a master plan by Peter Merkley, and it's a kind of almost a puzzle where buildings get replaced, and it turns into a kind of compositional collage of different shapes of buildings. And we were the last our project was the last piece of that competition series, and you can see the gray building on the bottom, which is a very slim building that serves as a sound barrier for the more expensive flats in the tower behind. The client was interested in doing having an experimental approach to this competition under the motto, the idea of sufficiency. Sufficiency is one of the subcategories of the idea of sustainability, and as you surely know, sufficiency as for an English-speaking audience is much clearer to understand. Is of course a principle according to which you use only as many resources as you actually need, and not the goal is not to maximize the use of resources. This was the competition, and we started, and of course it was sufficiency, which means that it's very economical housing. And we had to team up with a general contractor who would be a partner for us in developing it, and he had to guarantee a price which is about half of the normal price of housing in Switzerland, an almost utopian, unrealistic goal. So what we did next, please. What we did is we looked at the cheapest way of building housing in Switzerland, which would be a simple volume with balconies that serve also as an access to the apartments. In the US, we have the same for very economical housing, that there are only few staircases, and there are kind of balconies or pathways that lead to the apartments on different levels. The disadvantage of this model that you can see here, that you create this red zone in which by Swiss law, you have to count the surface, the maximum surface that you can build into this, this red area counts to the usable surface. So it reduces the surface you can actually build, which is very bad and impossible. So what we did is we eliminated every second balcony and said, okay, let's do a duplex apartment figure, and let's stack 3 duplexes on top of each other. So you can see that the red area where your use surface is reduced almost to nothing. But then we have the problem of having the high rise. You can see the line on the left facing that building, which would create a very uncomfortable, not so open relationship. So what we did is next, we stepped it back, and we basically conceived a building that would have a typology of double height. We call them maisonette loft, duplex loft apartments, with a minimum of equipment in the apartments, and they would differ not in typology, but only in depth, that is in size. So the lowest one would be the deepest and the largest, and they would be ordered by their size, like you buy a t-shirt. You choose the size between S, L, ML, or XL. Next, please.
So here you can see the plan, and it's super repetitive, as repetition maximizes or minimizes building cost. One central staircase, one escape route, always the same bathroom, always the same kitchen, and an industrial stair made of galvanized steel that we put in as an insert, as an objet trouvé, to organize the space. And I'm quickly going to toggle through these apartments. So below is always the lower floor with the access here directly from the garden side. And on the upper floor, there is the area where you would probably most likely will sleep. These are apartments that the client will ask for, apartments for 1 to 2 person households. So there's no internal wall that divides rooms. You could insert walls if they want to, but for now it's not planned. You can see that the position of the central staircase and of the other element, the bathroom cubicle, allows for 3 spaces, 3 different spaces. And also you will be able, this staircase is as big as you need it for to put in an elevator for disabled or for wheelchair access later on if somebody with a wheelchair moves in. So the staircase is huge. It's 1 meter 10 in radius. So there's plenty of space under the staircase, and you can also use it as a bookshelf or to put plants on or whatever. Gets a bit tighter in the M, but still the configuration still works with the 3 rooms. And then,
and Oliver, you're talking to a New York City audience, so for them,
everything is much smaller in New York. Yeah, right.
Yeah, for them it would be huge. You know, they would be happy with this S, without a problem. But as soon
but the S is the most spectacular anyway, because it's so narrow, and then it has almost half of it is a double height space of 5 meter 80 in height, and you can see the scale of the staircase compared to a table where 4 people can easily sit on, and you're on top of the building with a fantastic view. Yeah, so basically, if you come along this open balcony, it's like when you're going to a row house, right? It's like it's a terrace house, but it's also like terraced housing, and the facade also reflects that there's this figure of the 2 windows with a little canopy that kind of shows these house-like types. So when you enter from the balcony side, directly in, and then there's the big double height space with the staircase in the center. This is still competition phase where the staircase is smaller, the actual one is much bigger. And this is the way you see the double height space. You can also see that we try to be, there's no sense of a kind of interior, but this whole building is assembled of different parts. So from left, you see a concrete column, and the facade is a wooden wall, a non-load bearing, and then the dividing walls would be either in brick or in concrete, and the ceilings will be in concrete. So it's an assembly of different materials. Each has its own quality that brings a richness to this space, but also an openness we would like to leave everything as rough as possible so that people could either paint it themselves, or at least they feel that there is it's an open construction and not a defined one.
And the one is interesting other reason was that when we teamed up with the general contractor at the competition, there was one where we had a good friend, and we phoned him, and so this general contractor was a conventional one who has access to all the kinds of building materials and all the building processes that you would have on the market, while many other competitors in the competition were consciously choosing wood building contractors because of the ecological value of wooden construction. But we knew that the pressure, the cost pressure in Europe on wooden construction is incredible. It's still a bit more costly than conventional construction. And we also thought it was a really interesting challenge to do a composite construction instead of, relying on the purity of the wood construction. And that impure composite construction gave us many ideas about how things could come together.
So this is the facade facing the street and the city. It reads as a 4-floor building, but actually it's an 8-floor building. So it has this grand scale of taking one window over 2 floors together. It has a corrugated Eternit facade that reflects on the former industrial use, but also has of the site, but also has an intensity and a delicacy of its own. And behind this building, you have to imagine a red high-rise building built entirely in wood. So there's also this kind of David Goliath issue we're having with this big tower standing next to ours, and we were not only trying to up the scale, but also the kind of the form of living, you know, not that the poor or the low-cost apartments, they look at the fancy tower, but that our ambition was that our building is that these people from the tower will look at our building and think this is actually a really cool way to live. So they will look at the green facade. The green facade has to do with the garden. It's this mint color, also contrasting, of course, the red tower. And
of course,
while we believe in dialogue, we also believe in autonomy of things and in difference, aren't we, Thomas?
Yes, and we found with this step volume, we could do a small building on the side that somehow was able to compete with these humongous towers that stand next to it, because it has a kind of iconic formal quality that reminds us also of works or objects by Etrosorzas, for example, where the magic object is somehow able to compete in a world of indifferent objects.
This is the view from above. Okay, the last project we're showing, and since this event is also hosted by the Swiss Consulate, we're showing the Swiss Embassy in Algeria. It's a project we won. Thomas, when did we win this? 2017, 2018? So it's a long process. It's a very complicated process. Algeria is a country in transformation. There were long delays on our way, but it's an adventure that we're very grateful for, and it's an amazing country to build in this house.
We have, let me just insert something. The last 2 projects we're dealing with a wiggle room you find in housing, where you can, the question was, which are the ways to produce innovation in reality, in the reality of housing production, and where innovation would be measured in very practical terms in the kitchen hall, or for example, the possibility of having fantastic low-cost housing on the site. Here we found out after we won that competition that the innovation and the importance of this project lies on a completely different plane.
We were very lucky with this site. It's a beautiful hilly site in Algeria, in Algiers. It's in an area where there's lots of other embassies. And embassies always have a problem of security, or a real question of security. But we were lucky because, first of all, it's a Swiss embassy. It doesn't need to be as secure maybe as other embassies. And second of all, there's a wall around a beautiful garden that provides the security we needed. And there's the grey building, quite a monumental recent work, which is the Chancellery. That's where the offices of the ambassador and the collaborators are. That one is the kind of gatekeeper, and the access control works through that building. So we were free to design actually something like a garden pavilion. And the program was just big enough to just fill the whole site of our construction on one floor, because we thought there's a family moving to a foreign country. They have representational rooms in their house where there's events, dinners. And then if they live on the second floor in this beautiful garden that is fenced in, it's such a detached way of living. And we wanted to house the private quarters and the official quarters to be on one floor. And if there's no event, the kids can run through the whole building, and the whole family, but also the visitors, they have access of this beautiful garden.
So the plan we envisioned the plan as a kind of internal garden, as a kind of kaleidoscopic system where figure where you would like in a Picasso cubist painting, you would, when you look at it, you would be able to focus on certain figures and then lose them again and be detached and see a kind of strange relationship between a flowing space and fixated elements. So it was really the early paintings by Picasso that inspired us. It's very simple to explain in functional terms. The lower part is the private area for the ambassador and his family or her family, with a green courtyard kind of being at the center of their apartment. And then on the top, there's the official access for the state guests. And towards the garden, there's a kind of saloon, a kind of a reception space, and a dining area. And all these spaces can be interconnected. So as Oliver said, during the time when there are no guests, the house has all the doors open and you can use the entire house. And on the left side, there's the car park for the ambassador and the kind of kitchen and service area for the cook and the people who help in the household. So the next, yes, and as I said, it's really the kind the cubist order and the fluid cubist order of Picasso that interested us, and of course later we found out so many things. We found out that it was Picasso during the fight of the Algerian people for their independence who supported their cause. Huh? And did drawings to support their cause. And next, please.
And then Thomas and I, it's very un-Swiss to say, but Thomas and I had a huge fight during the competition because the idea for the one-story pavilion was very early. Then Thomas had so many problems with it that I got so annoyed. And Thomas, can you explain what your problem was?
Yes, my problem was very clear. I mean, you're doing you're an architect. You're doing a beautiful one-story pavilion of that scale. So who's the enemy? The enemy is the Barcelona pavilion of Mies van der Rohe. It's like Jupiter, or like a gigantic sun that burns us all when we get close, you know, that pulls us in its kind of gravitational field and makes us slaves for the rest of our lives. No, it's really terrible. It's really terrible. I mean, creatively speaking. And so how can you fight that terrible thing? How can you overcome this perfect model of the floating plane with the pillars underneath and the glass and the stone? You can do it by obscuring the main plane. You can do it by fighting against that plane, by creating a new relationship between horizontality and verticality, where the canopies become walls and the walls become canopies, and in the end you only see, in certain instances, you see the horizontal plane. And so that's
I think our conversation, Thomas, was like, but why is the problem? We can just stick stuff on it. And then we created a frieze, and then this canopy arrived, and then there was all these figural elements, like these kind of goggle windows that you see on the top left, the screens that are on certain walls that look a bit like Solowit paintings, the grid-like trellis facade of the bedrooms facing a sloping garden. So in the end, there wasn't a clear hierarchy anymore what was having the lead, right? It was rather a multitude of things that would form this whole pavilion together. And we thought that's a fantastic image or analogy to the diversity that Switzerland could bring to this country, or not to this country, but like it's a general, an inclusive and open idea of life, and that this building kind of could represent that.
Yeah, the role that Switzerland likes to play on the international scene is one of a very, very small country that has, but is because there are so many important institutions in Geneva and also in other cities of Switzerland that it can basically play a role as a kind of intermediate, an intermediate role that that is bigger than it is as a country. And internally, this is always, in Switzerland, it's always explained by the fact that also the Swiss are great at making compromises internally, because it's a country of many cantons and of many communities that have many independent ideas that have to make compromises all the time. So this was our idea of the many voices in a unity. But when we finally won the competition and we traveled with the model to Algeria, and we met our local architect, we selected our local architect, who is a great architect and with an important work in its own right, and who is very engaged in the societal struggle between the forces of democracy and freedom, between those forces and the forces of oppression and religious bigotry, Islamism. And in this tension that he faces every day, he said that this project for him is a project of openness and public openness and fragility, and one that is exactly doing the opposite what the forces that he fights against every day want to do in Algeria, which is to take the freedom of a secular away from a secular society and put it under the reign of religious bigotry, and also on the other hand of dictatorial forces that want to suppress the little of democracy that's starting to be created in Algeria. So it was interesting how what we did for very different reasons, but of course with knowing that during the competition that we did not want to do an orientalistic pastiche in this design. We did not want to cite kind of cliches of Islamic architecture. We did not want to kind of reinvent a tradition of Islamic architecture, as so many architects have done in the past when they built embassies, Western countries, when they built embassies in Arab countries. So we did something without knowing what it would, what the response would be. But now we're quite happy with it.
So just one more thing to construction here. This is the Bookshop Pavilion in Venice by James Sterling. And what we liked about is as we stressed out during the lecture, the lightness of it, and also the casualness, yet it is a very formally very strong architecture. And in the same sense, we didn't want to make, an Oscar Niemeyer concrete superstructure here, but we accept the fact that Algerian construction is quite rough and direct. We will be putting plaster on all the concrete structures, and then we would put another coat of glass fiber concrete plates on it. These are 16 millimeters thin. So the building will feel like it has leaves on it. It will have a similar lightness as in the first project we showed. There will be overlaps like fingernails, or as I said, like leaves, and that will give or support the lightness of it and not undermines monumentality. It has a roof terrace, and from the roof terrace you can still have there's a private part and a public part where you can have events, drinks, receptions, even dinners, where you can look down on the bay of Algiers. So we started this project a few years ago. We're now in the basement, and the walls just have been poured of the basement last week. While we were working on this project, the political situation changed quite a bit in Algeria, and there was a huge optimism that the country would change for the better. This optimism got slowed down a bit also due to COVID, where lockdowns were rather severe in Algeria. We'll be going in 2 weeks to see the site and to talk to people. I'm very curious to hear how things are changing and how they will perceive it. But we hope when this building will be finished in 1 year, that it will be part of maybe a new Algeria that is opening up and allowing difference and a respectful way of life. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Oliver, and thank you, Thomas. I reintroduce Daisy Ames, professor both here at Cooper Union as well as at Columbia with her own practice. I also want to encourage others to post questions in the chat if you wish, and we can take them on one by one. And just by way of introduction, maybe I'll pose one question and then yield to Daisy as we move along. It's both easy and difficult to engage you from my generation, because you remind me of how old I am, because many of the themes that you're dealing with were addressed in a different guise, in a different historical moment during the years 1981 through 86 when I was in school. And yet your encounter with postmodernism, if I can use the word loosely here, has many guises. And I'd like to try to articulate differences in between them, and maybe you can help us unpack that a little bit to see where your interests really lie. Let's say the easy ones are the ones that have to do with overt referentiality, the idea that you appropriate, let's say, a canopy from Sterling or from Haydock, and it becomes a kind of intertextuality with culture. A few people understand it, whether in humor or in alliance, but it becomes a kind of overt reference to something else. There's another type of operation that you seem to be interested in, and that was also a plight of postmodernism, where many architects were appealing to a deep history in terms of building typologies, but recognizing that you can't actually build with poché because the poché is 2 millimeters thin. And so the theme of thinness became something to elaborate. And we had a slight discussion about Venturi on the topic of thinness. And so that perspective, it has nothing to do with referentiality. It has to do with the thematic clarity of how tectonics goes from the advent of thickness to thinness, and a whole new syntax emerges as a result of that. The third one that you just presented has to do with a kind of connection that you build between art and architecture that results in a kind of the imperative of translation, like a cubist painting that indicates motion or multidimensionality, seeing the front and the back of the same artifact is a very different thing than a plan, even if that plan shows the kind of fractalizations of forms. And so the prospect of translation seems to be a huge factor that we get to do as we bracket something in a kind of autonomous context. Of course, in between all of this is humor and wit, however dry that may be, or the appeal to legitimation, which is of another generation, that there was a generation that sought that connection to history as an appeal to a search for a truth or a historical cultural substantiation. So I'd like you to position, if these three categories are legitimate ones for you, could you position them with respect to your priorities, your interests, debunk them, or whatever?
I think, Nader, we can completely relate to what you're saying. I'd like to start at the end with the third category. We are really, really interested in architecture that has a multitude of voices, where elements gain autonomy, and we tend to see it architecture in parallel to how we want to see life in society. We live in a society where we wish that tolerance and difference should not be stand in contradiction to our ability to speak to each other, to live together, to share things. Actually, we feel that the autonomy of the human being and the freedom of a person is the condition upon which her or his ability and will to engage with others is built. So the more we work, the more we feel that we don't need to control, but we can allow multitude to happen. And of course, that can be interpreted in terms of a postmodern complexity and contradiction approach, but it can also be seen in a very contemporary way, where we want to build a society that's as open, as free as possible, but also where we have a building industry that is that works with many materials that are detached from each other, that are crisscrossed with joints, where things are not allowed, materials are not anymore allowed to touch each other. So there are many levels on which this quest for multitude is
yeah, and I want to add, because it's part of our design process as well, and Thomas and I, we do everything together, and it's the project is in between us and the collaborators in the office, so it's part of a discussion, a debate of different ideas coming to the table at the same time. I think 2 or 3 years ago we gave a lecture in Norway, and then Nevin Fuchs he said, so you guys, you never speak about space. Like, what has space to do with your work? Like, what's the role of space? And then, we were so taken by this because we couldn't answer. But we realized, yes, we never really speak about space as an entity or as a whole, but we rather speak of different elements that constitute that space. So we can, elaborate a column and of the door that is next to it, and the floor, and something else, and another element. And each one of those could have autonomous ideas, and space, or the totality, or as Venturi Scott Brown would say, the whole, the difficult whole, it's something that happens as a form of dialogue in between those things. And we're actually quite happy with that, because it also means that things can be different. And in the design process, it also means that you can lose one thing or add another if you have a problem, design-wise, cost-wise, construction-wise, or client-wise, when they say, we really don't like that kitchen, could you please design a different one? Then you can adapt to that. It's not depending on one single idea or hierarchy.
But I think that's a fair response, but there is a difference, let's say, between architecture as raw matter versus architecture as a semantically loaded signifier. And it seems that whether you're looking at thinness or you're looking at the appropriation of icons or the translation of one art into another, it presupposes, I suppose, communication, somebody who's projecting a message, somebody who's receiving it, and the possibility of reception, translation, mistranslation, misunderstanding. I mean, this idea of trying not to control a singular message, but maybe something intertextual, falls within a different lexicon than many would like to, a modality that many would like to reject, certainly in the last 20 years. So it seems that you're giving rebirth to the problem of semantics. Would you agree?
Yes, but there is we are still on the side of Raphael Moneo, who said that, once you leave this construction side, the buildings are silent, and it doesn't, and we feel that the
buildings are not silent, but the architect is silent.
The architect
is gone. Yeah. So the building speaks for itself. It will stand for itself.
And even the architect, given that time passes, we don't expect to communicate clearly, or we don't need the kind of the educated connoisseur to stand in front of our building, but we feel that the love and the love that we invest in our buildings creates a certain density of engagement that can be felt by anybody who uses that building, because we all know that we all see a building from afar that hasn't got any love. We know that. There are enough of them on this planet. So if you create a kind of density, and be it with a series of elements that you need anyway, say canopies or entrances or doors or doorknobs, that you can turn them in something that has a certain dignity and that takes them beyond their industrial banality, which is haunting them all the time. I mean, that is a little bit our problem, that translating the dignity of historic architecture in our modern times is the question of how do you transform industrial materials in something that has a central element, and that gives this a sense of meaning and of dignity to those who use it. And we first thought that it was a curse that we would only get kind of small budget projects for housing, but then at some point we realized that it's a real blessing, because it pushed us into using materials that the kind of great generation of Swiss architects in the 90s or in the 80s would have never touched.
Thomas, Oliver, it was really great to hear your lecture. I really appreciate many of your projects and the way that you are quite sensitive to not only the program and the materiality, the social structures that you're innovating, but also that you keep a close eye on composition. And there are three main ways that I feel like composition plays an important role in your work, not only in the way that you photograph it, but perhaps in terms of the conversation that you're having with the viewer, that modality that Nader was just mentioning, maybe the autonomous viewer, the psychoanalytic approach that I think that you maybe inhabit when you think about the shadow of the column, the reading of your Zwhatt project as 4 stories rather than 8 stories, and even the kind of cubist aspects and plans. So I'm curious how and where you mine the energy to balance, I feel, those 2 aspects of architecture, which is one, the program and what you might be hired to do, but also keep a firm hold on things that I think Cooper as an institution upholds, which are these elements that Hayek brings in around composition and elements of representation.
It has to do, Daisy, I think that's a great question, because also for the students, because for us, we typically start our projects in a very pragmatic way. That we do a lot of, our homework that we need to do in terms of surfaces and building laws and program. And we are not starting out our projects with very original ideas, not at all. But we try to, it's more like you bake a bread and you make the dough and you put all the stuff inside. And you need to put all the, if it's raisin bread, you put raisins inside. And when you knead the dough, then the actual bread is starting to become bread, And the kneading process is the process of transformation, where we find out during the kneading process of the bread where the wiggle room is, where is the possibility of having 7% of something else. And sometimes it's economical, sometimes it's spatial, sometimes it's program. So it's really yeah.
Thomas, we had this discussion with the client of the Zwhatt project, because it came with a general contractor's offer. So, and the general contractor, he almost calculated no fee for us. It was a disaster. We won the competition and we realized, hey, really, I mean, yeah, and I'm not saying what we thought, but we were like, holy shit. And we had so much hours on this competition. So then we had a meeting and we were saying, look, guys, we can never build this for that fee. It's impossible. And they were like, yeah, but 80% of the work that provides, 20% of the work provides 80% of the energy that you put in the project. And so it's almost done. And then we said, yeah, but listen, guys, we are not designers or artists. We are planners, right? You pay us for responsibility. We make sure that it's not leaking, that the building laws work, that it's not falling down, that nothing is falling apart. That's what you pay us for. The architecture you get for free. And indeed, I've never had the feeling we got, paid an extra fee because the architecture is great. But actually, that that's as Thomas said, we find the wiggle room, and then it belongs to us. And of course, we have to communicate it to the client and to people what we're doing. But still,
it's like we are always
part of what they pay us for.
I feel we are always on probation. They are, you get a job, and then when we act responsibly, and we do act responsibly, at some point the client is allowing us to bring in these crazy ideas, because at the same time they know that we act responsibly. So there is a relationship between these two also in the process. And then there's another one where the model, we build a lot of physical models that we present to the client, and that creates also a kind of a base of trust and a common process where the client sees what she has seen the week before, that it's only slowly transforming. It's also important.
I have one more question about pedagogy. Perhaps you mentioned it and alluded it to in your first statement, where you said that housing is the productive field in architecture where you can address some of the issues related to materiality, social structures, perhaps climate change. And in my experience, it seems to be the housing studios in schools that end up being the integrated studios where students start to think about structure and they start to think about, say, architecture that's less the 7% that Thomas just mentioned, or the architecture that comes for free, and more the really kind of nitty-gritty moments, no pun intended, around structure. And so I wonder, in terms of teaching architecture, what projects have been meaningful for you? You mentioned a few before, but I'm curious about how you see a combination of answering some of the demands that clients you have today, and how you balance teaching architecture versus what you are experiencing out in the field. How to teach students in housing and to go into the field of architecture, designing housing.
Well, I mean, housing is, I think, for our profession, it's, I think, the most toughest of all the works that we do, Thomas, isn't it? Because we spend so much time on the plans. I think organizing a big apartment building is very, very difficult, and it takes a lot of time. And it's very hard in a 14-week semester to go with the students through that process. Yet there's, everybody lives, dwells somewhere. We all can relate to bedroom, to a window in that bedroom, to a kitchen. Is it working? Is it not working? What is a good space? What is a bad space? Where do I feel comfortable? Where not? So personal experience, I think, is always super important. But what we try to encourage students is to be enthusiastic about architecture, and to really to try to explore the potential of what architecture can do. And we do that either with references, and another, just to quickly touch your first question, we are very selective with architecture. We usually only use or present or give as reference to students works that we really like, and that it really means something to us, even if we don't quite know what they mean to us. But it's like with human beings, you are attracted to someone without maybe knowing why, but then over the years you understand what the qualities are. And I think it's the same.
I think this is right? Yeah, Daisy, I think the challenge in housing is quite interesting, because housing in every country is carrying a lot of weight of unspoken conventions, huh? And these unspoken conventions, they are inside on all of us. And how can you question those? Huh? How can you get beyond those? And our experience was very interesting in teaching that those unspoken conventions can be overcome in teaching housing with intuition and speed, rather than with analysis and thought. So we usually teach, have a preliminary phase when we teach housing, where we throw the students in the cold water, and we force them to design large facades and interior space and everything at the same time, without ever asking them to combine everything. And in the second phase, or in the last 75% of the semester, they have to kind of collect their pieces and start to reflect on what they have done intuitively. And that gap between intuitive intelligence that can overcome cliches and traditions and so on, and the later stage of reflection, I think we prefer that order, huh? Instead of having a long phase of reflection that leads to a very controlled, smart solution.
Look, I'll encourage anybody and everybody to post questions in the chat room. And while they do, maybe I will ask another question. Just given the way you are, you obviously enjoy the architecture as a dialogue. You are both very conversant at a social level, but your architecture is speaking to other architectures. Invariably, as architects, we have the urgencies and the pressures of the moment, the client, their demands, the costs, and the immediacy of a problem. But just the way that you work obviously recalls a different time, which is sometimes centuries old, sometimes decades old. And so you're having a conversation with our architectural culture at large. I'd like you to articulate in a way what constitutes, beyond the client, what you think are the urgencies of today, that a next generation or an architect 200 years from now will look back at you and be able to synthesize a thesis that you were able to construct that is not derivative of the architects to which you refer, but is building up on and transforms and overturns them. Could you speak to this question of anachronism and how time plays into the critical part of what you do? I'm interested in what you are critical of, and therefore how that criticism converts into a conversation over a longer durée, if you wish.
Of course, we are critical of purism. We're critical of a kind of exclusionary architecture. We're critical of a kind of priestly voice in architecture. We are critical of an architecture that wants to isolate itself from the reality by putting itself on a pedestal. All these things, I mean, we are quite relaxed about, you know, the fact that we are in the present moment. And Nader, I think the present moment is so incredibly exciting. I mean, the last 5 years especially, because all the factors are shifting. You know, we can feel the tectonic plates of reality shifting under our feet, and these tectonic plates of reality, be it questions of society, of equality, of climate change, they are going to change our profession completely. So innovation is not something that needs to be pre-envisioned. I don't know, that needs to be. We don't need the plan about innovation. We all know that in which direction we should move to survive as a human race. And so and the fact that so many factors have changed means that architecture will renew itself completely. I mean, that's just because most of the factors that architects create their project out of are beyond their control. It's there was an architecture of the welfare state. There was an architecture of the economy of Chicago of the 1870s. No, there was an architecture, and so these powers that are there, they are going to create the new architecture. So we are completely relaxed about this. And what you said about looking back and looking into the future, I think even anachronistic attitudes are a fact of the presence.
I'm going to read in the chat room, Parker Antal. I can read your question, and you can elaborate if you wish. At what point do you think that you put so many ideas into a building that all the ideas merge? And at what point do they or can they cancel out? And how do we know when the building has enough ideas? So it's really a question about the curatorial control of the overlay of ideas and how they are able to synthesize or disperse to the point that they cannot reconcile each other. Parker, you want to let me know if I've interpreted that correctly?
That's correct.
It's a very good question, Parker. The good thing about building a house is that it takes so long. And the good thing in the conditions that we work in, that we are in control till the very end. So, we take this as an opportunity to start with ideas, start without an idea, then start with one, with two, maybe a set of ideas. And then we just work. And within a time frame of 3 years, I think at the end, what is what means what, how do they connect or not. I never had the feeling that something merges in our buildings, but that things can stand for themselves. And I also never had the feeling they cancel each other out. I think you sometimes know when you make a drawing or you make a model, you think at first week it's super exciting, but then we're 2 plus another group of people and somebody says, oh, but this is crap. And then you might react a bit insulted, but after 2 days you realize, oh, maybe it wasn't so good, maybe we really don't need this, whatever. And Thomas and I, we work now for 14 years together, and sometimes we fight. And we have a very simple rule if we fight. If you're not, we just say the one who is more right is right, and then we do it. Mm-hmm. And then short after, the next day or 2 days later, or maybe a week later, you realize who was right. And it's not a problem. And with growing up a bit, we also realized that our vanities are not very important, because it's the project that is important, and that we can act freer on the project if we separate ourselves from it.
And so then there's another thing when we talk about Parker, when we talk about a thing or articulation, no? And we talk about, should it be more implicit or more explicit, the way we do it. Then our experience was that we usually go for the more explicit, because the human eye, when a building is finished, has the capacity to unify a multitude of impressions and things into a new whole. It's not just in architecture, but in anything. For example, if you set a table and you put fruit and soup and all kinds of things on that table, that will be a huge composition of maybe 100 different parts. The eye will be able to fuse this view into a beautiful unity in just no time, no? And so the ability of maintaining attention between the single thing and the eye that unifies everything, we believe in that, huh? And also over time, when a building is done, it tends to, the first day it's finished, it looks very new and sparkly. And then even after a few weeks and after a few years, it will start to fall slowly into the background of the city. Huh? And that's also a wonderful quality to experience, and I think that quality and that process of the building falling back into the background cannot be anticipated. I don't think we can design buildings that are, some Swiss architects did try that, to design buildings that automatically take that, that create that background for the city.
There are some architects who come into the profession, as you may have, as I have, with commissions of high restrictions of budget. And yet a thesis emerges out of that work. And my question to you is, if you were given extraordinary budgets, and I suspect you would continue to do the same, set restrictions on yourself if others did not. But is there a rhetorical project that you would like to undertake that your budgets have never allowed you to, that you would like to yet undertake, and that only money can achieve that, and it is the from a disciplinary point of view?
Nader, that question is terrifying me. It's terrifying. It's you're throwing us out in outer space, you know, where we can't hold on to anything. We have no. I mean, Oliver, didn't Adam Caruso ask that question at some point when we were in London, in another guise?
No, he said, what would you do if you'd build in I don't know, in Florence or whatever, right?
Yeah.
In the center of the city. But it's, you know, it's a freedom if you're building in a suburb. It's a freedom if the budget is not so high. I mean, even the embassy, you know, it's not a high budget. It's like really hard work to make it the way we want it to make. They don't even give us art for it. Because it's Algeria, they only give art to New York maybe or Washington. No, but it's not a problem. It's, you know, if
what you need, Oliver. But what we need is wiggle room. We need, you know, you need the tension.
Yes, you need wiggle room. Yeah.
Yeah, you need the tension between what needs to be achieved, but also you need somebody who gives you some space to move. No, otherwise architecture is not possible. Huh?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But no, there when I was I don't know, 20 something, 22 or so, I went to Seattle because that was the height of grunge, you know, and I thought, man, Seattle must be the coolest place in the world because they have this most amazing music. And so I went to Seattle, and after a day I realized why the music is so amazing, because Seattle was so incredibly boring at the time. So all they were doing was like hanging out in garages and making fantastic music to kind of free themselves of this city. And yeah, so no, I don't need the palace in I don't know where and the unlimited budget. We're quite happy.
On the contrary,
but on the other hand, I have to say that in Switzerland we are in a very, very fortunate situation that is also politically, you know, very good for building culture, deeply rooted competition systems. Cities giving more surface areas for private developers if they make a competition with independent juries, and that keeps an architecture culture growing here, and it allows young practices to work, which I don't think there's anything like that in most of the other countries, and yeah, so we're already in a very privileged situation, I would say.
Oliver, Thomas, this is the first of many discussions I hope to have with both of you, and we've yet to have a full-body discussion about how your presence is going to be manifest next semester. But given the time and the next round of meetings that is starting up for everybody in a couple of minutes, maybe I can ask you for some final statements. If the previous one wasn't already one, it sure sounded like one. But Thomas, you were going to say something in response.
Oh, I completely forgot about it. No, but what is amazing for Oliver and me is to know that we speak through Zoom into this incredible space of Cooper Union, which is part of our imaginary American world, you know, and I get goosebumps as I say this, and we'd love to
I want to
there
promise you one
personally.
thing. Cooper Union is many things, but America it is not. So come and witness it for yourself.
But you can, there is an idealized version of every place, and I want to insist on that that can be a strong motivation. There is an idealized Italy, there is an idealized South Africa, there is an idealized America.
And part of that myth remains intact, whether it's the Cooper Union of the turn of the century, or whether it's the Cooper Union of Haydock, or whether it's the one that still imagines that there's a space within which to project. And so I hope to be able to welcome you in person here next semester so we can continue this conversation. Thank you so much to both of you, and thank you, Daisy, for joining me in this conversation. Till soon.
Thank you, Nader. Thank you, Daisy. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Real
Thank you,
pleasure.
Daisy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nader. Bye-bye.